David Harrington never imagined that teaching a frustrated 8-year-old how to fix a wobbly bike wheel would become the moment that changed everything. As a widowed father struggling to make ends meet in the quiet town of Millbrook Valley, he was just doing what came naturally, helping a child in need. He had no idea that across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a luxury sedan, billionaire tech mogul Victoria Ashford was recording every moment on her phone, watching this stranger patiently guide her son through something she'd never been able to teach him herself. What started as a simple 20-minute lesson in a small-town park was about to bridge two completely different worlds in ways neither of them could have imagined. But before we dive into how this extraordinary encounter unfolded, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if stories about unexpected connections and life-changing kindness resonate with you, make sure you're subscribed, because we have something truly special lined up for tomorrow that you won't want to miss. The morning mist still clung to the mountains surrounding Millbrook Valley as David Harrington's worn boots crunched across the gravel parking lot of Riverside Community Park. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday, and most of the town was still asleep, but David had learned that early mornings were when he did his best thinking. The park's old wooden benches and faded playground equipment told the story of a community that had seen better days, much like David himself. At 34, David carried the weight of responsibility in the slight stoop of his shoulders and the premature lines around his green eyes. His dark hair, perpetually tousled from running his hands through it during moments of stress, caught the morning light as he surveyed the quiet park. This had become his Saturday routine. A peaceful walk before his daughter Emma woke up, a few precious minutes to plan out their day and push away the constant worry about bills, about being enough, about raising a 7-year-old girl on his own. The accident that took his wife Sarah had happened 3 years ago, but some mornings, the grief still hit him like a physical blow. Sarah had been the organized one, the planner, the one who somehow made their modest teacher's salary stretch to cover everything Emma needed. Now David worked double shifts at Millbrook Valley's small manufacturing plant, assembling components for agricultural equipment, trying to fill the gap that Sarah's income and her steady presence had left behind. He was about to turn back toward his car when he heard it, the frustrated whimper of a child on the verge of tears. Near the park's bike path, a small boy with sandy brown hair was crouched next to a expensive-looking mountain bike, his small hands gripping the handlebars as he stared at the front wheel with defeated confusion. "Come on, stupid thing," the boy muttered, his voice thick with the kind of frustration that David recognized from his own daughter's struggles with homework or a particularly stubborn shoelace. David glanced around the park, expecting to see a parent nearby, but the area was deserted except for the two of them. The boy couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, wearing clothes that even David's untrained eye could tell were expensive. A pristine blue jacket and matching pants that probably cost more than David spent on groceries in a month. The bike itself was a marvel of engineering, clearly top of the line with components that David had only seen in magazine advertisements. But despite its quality, the front wheel was wobbling dangerously, making the entire bike unsafe to ride. "Hey there," David called out gently, not wanting to startle the child. "Having some trouble with your bike?" The boy looked up, his brown eyes wide and slightly wary. David could see tear tracks on his cheeks, and his heart clenched with the familiar parental instinct to help, to fix, to make things better. "It's broken," the boy said simply, his voice carrying a resignation that seemed far too mature for his age. "I can't ride it, and I don't know how to fix it." David approached slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. Years of helping Emma through various childhood crises had taught him that children needed to feel safe before they would accept help from a stranger. "I'm David," he said, crouching down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy replied, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. "Tommy Ashford." The last name didn't ring any bells for David, which wasn't surprising in a small town where newcomers often passed through without making much of an impression on long-time residents like himself. "Well, Tommy, I've fixed my share of wobbly wheels over the years. My daughter Emma has put her bike through just about everything you can imagine. Mind if I take a look?" Tommy's face brightened slightly, hope replacing some of the defeat in his expression. "You really know how to fix bikes?" "I've learned out of necessity," David said with a gentle smile. "When you're a dad, you become a mechanic, a doctor, a teacher, and about 10 other things whether you planned to or not." As David knelt beside the bike and began examining the wheel, he had no idea that across the street, Victoria Ashford sat in her black Tesla Model S, her phone pressed against the window as she recorded every moment of this interaction. She had been following Tommy at a distance since he'd slipped out of their temporary rental house, her heart pounding with worry and something else she couldn't quite name. She had watched her son struggle with the bike all week, had seen his frustration mount as he tried to figure out what was wrong. She had offered to call someone to fix it, had suggested they simply buy a new one, but Tommy had insisted he wanted to learn how to fix things himself. Victoria, despite all her success in the tech world, despite building a company worth billions, had no idea how to help her son with something as simple as a bicycle repair. Now, watching this stranger, this kind man with gentle hands and infinite patience, kneel in the gravel and begin showing Tommy exactly what was wrong and how to fix it, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. She kept recording, but for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about content or documentation or capturing moments for later analysis. She was simply watching her son's face light up as he learned something new from someone who had time to teach him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:45 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 3 years. David Harrington's calloused hand reached out instinctively, silencing the noise before it could wake Emma. The small ranch house on Maple Street held its breath in the quiet morning. The only sound, the gentle hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, and the distant rumble of the early freight train making its way through the valley. David allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to lie still, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that he kept promising himself he'd fix when he had time. The stain had grown since winter, spreading like a slow-moving cloud across the white paint. Just another item on an endless list of repairs that his modest factory wages couldn't quite cover. The house still felt too big and too empty without Sarah. Her side of the bed remained untouched, her pillow still holding the faint scent of the lavender spray she used to use for sleep. David had tried moving to the couch those first few months, but Emma had found him there one morning and asked with 7-year-old directness if he didn't want to sleep in the same house as her anymore. He'd been back in their bedroom ever since. Rolling out of bed, David's feet found the familiar path through the darkened hallway. First stop was always Emma's room, where he'd peek through the slightly cracked door to see her small form buried under the rainbow comforter her grandmother had made. Her dark hair, so much like Sarah's, spread across the pillow in gentle waves. At 7, Emma was already showing signs of her mother's determined spirit and her father's gentle heart. The kitchen was David's domain now, though he'd never quite mastered Sarah's effortless way with breakfast. She could make pancakes that were perfectly round and golden, eggs that never stuck to the pan, toast that came out exactly the right shade of brown. David's cooking was more functional than artistic, but Emma never complained. She'd learned early that complaining about food meant Daddy's feelings got hurt, and Emma Harrington was already wise enough to know that her father carried enough hurt for both of them. The coffee maker gurgled to life as David opened the refrigerator, mentally calculating what he could pack for Emma's lunch with the ingredients on hand. Peanut butter and jelly again. But he'd cut it into fun shapes with the cookie cutters Sarah had loved to use. An apple, slightly bruised but still good. A juice box from the bulk pack he'd bought on sale at Henderson's Market. The bills sat in their usual spot on the counter, held down by the ceramic paperweight Emma had made in art class, a lumpy, painted creation that David treasured more than any expensive decoration. The electric bill's red final notice stamp seemed to glow in the morning light. The rent was due in 5 days. His paycheck from Millbrook Manufacturing wouldn't come until Friday, and even then it would be a careful dance of priorities and delayed payments. David had become an expert at this financial juggling act. Pay the rent first, always. Keep the lights on and the heat working for Emma. Buy groceries, even if it meant generic brands and creative meals made from whatever was on sale. Everything else, his own needs, the house repairs, the small luxuries that other families took for granted, came last, if at all. He pulled his work clothes from the dryer where he'd left them the night before. The navy blue uniform shirt with David embroidered over the pocket was clean, but showing wear at the collar and cuffs. His work boots, resoled twice in the past year, sat by the back door next to Emma's tiny sneakers with the cartoon characters on the sides. At Millbrook Manufacturing, David assembled hydraulic components for farm equipment, standing at Station 7 for 8 hours a day, his hands moving in practiced motions that had become as automatic as breathing. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he and Sarah first moved to Millbrook Valley. He'd had dreams then, maybe opening his own small business or going back to school to become a teacher like Sarah. But dreams were luxuries that single fathers with bills to pay couldn't afford. His co-workers were good people, folks who'd grown up in the valley like he had, who understood what it meant to work hard for everything you had. They'd rallied around him after Sarah's accident, bringing casseroles and offering to babysit Emma when he needed to work overtime. Mrs. Patterson next door still watched Emma after school, refusing to take more than token payment despite David's protests. The community of Millbrook Valley was like that. People who looked out for each other because they understood that sometimes life knocked you down, and the only way to get back up was with help from your neighbors. It was a place where a man could raise his daughter with small-town values, where Emma could ride her bike safely around the neighborhood, and where everyone knew her name. But it was also a place where opportunities were limited, where the biggest employer was the manufacturing plant, and where dreams sometimes had to be postponed indefinitely in favor of practical necessities. David loved this town and its people, but some nights, lying awake and listening to the freight train's distant whistle, he wondered if he was giving Emma enough, if love and stability were sufficient, or if she deserved the bigger world that his limited resources couldn't provide. The coffee finished brewing just as he heard Emma's feet hit the floor above him. In 15 minutes, she'd come padding down the stairs in her favorite purple pajamas, her hair sticking up in impossible directions, asking if today was a pancake day or a cereal day. And David would smile and ruffle her hair and tell her it was whatever kind of day she wanted it to be, because that's what fathers did. They made every day the best day they could, with whatever they had to work with. The call came on Thursday afternoon, just as David was clocking out from his shift at Millbrook Manufacturing. The vibration of his phone against his leg made his stomach clench. Calls during work hours were never good news when you were a single parent. "Mr. Harrington?" The voice was crisp, professional, carrying the kind of authority that made David straighten his shoulders automatically. "This is Principal Rodriguez from Millbrook Elementary. I need you to come in as soon as possible to discuss Emma." David's heart hammered against his ribs as he walked quickly toward his truck, phone pressed to his ear. "Is she hurt? What happened?" "She's not injured, but there's been an incident. How soon can you be here?" 20 minutes later, David sat in the principal's office, his work uniform still carrying the smell of machine oil and metal shavings. Emma sat in the chair beside him, her small legs swinging nervously, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "Emma got into an altercation today during lunch," Principal Rodriguez explained, her tone carefully neutral. "She was defending another student who was being teased about his second-hand clothes." David looked at his daughter, seeing Sarah's fierce protective streak in the set of Emma's jaw. What kind of altercation? She pushed Bradley Hawkins into the mud when he wouldn't stop calling Timothy Chen names about his patched jeans, Emma said before the principal could respond. "And I'm not sorry, Daddy, Timothy was crying." Principal Rodriguez leaned forward. "While we appreciate Emma's compassion, we can't have students settling conflicts with physical force. This is Emma's second incident this month involving her defending other children." David felt a complex mix of pride and worry. Emma had inherited her mother's inability to stand by while others suffered, but in a world that often punished kindness, he feared what that trait might cost her. "I'll talk to her about finding other ways to help," David said quietly. "There's something else." Principal Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "The school counselor has noticed that Emma often brings very simple lunches compared to other students. And her clothes." She paused delicately. "We want to make sure she has everything she needs to succeed here." Heat flushed David's cheeks. He knew Emma's wardrobe was limited, mostly hand-me-downs from neighbors and carefully chosen pieces from the discount store. Her lunches were basic but nutritious, though he knew they looked sparse next to the elaborate meals some parents packed. "Emma has everything she needs," he said, perhaps more sharply than intended. "She's fed, clothed, and loved. If that's not enough from Millbrook Elementary—" "Mr. Harrington," Principal Rodriguez interrupted gently, I'm not criticizing your parenting. I'm offering help. We have programs. We don't need charity. The words came out harder than David meant them to. Emma's eyes widened at his tone, and he immediately felt ashamed. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. As they walked to the truck, Emma slipped her small hand into his. Daddy, are we poor? The question hit him like a physical blow. He stopped walking and knelt down, ignoring the curious stares of other parents picking up their children. Em, we have each other. We have our house and food and everything we need. Some families have more money than us, but that doesn't make us poor in the ways that matter. But you worry about money all the time, she said with the devastating honesty of childhood. I hear you talking to the bills when you think I'm asleep. David's throat tightened. He thought he'd been so careful to shield her from his financial anxiety, but children saw everything, felt everything. That evening, after Emma was asleep, David sat at his kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of papers. The numbers hadn't improved since the morning. The factory had announced potential layoffs due to decreased demand from agricultural customers hit by a rough growing season. David's seniority might protect him, but there were no guarantees. He pulled out the letter that had arrived that week from Emma's school about the upcoming spring field trip to the Science Museum in the state capital. The cost was modest, $60 including lunch and transportation, but it might as well have been $6,000 given his current situation. Emma had mentioned the trip every day since the letter came home, her excitement palpable as she talked about seeing real dinosaur bones in a planetarium show. David stared at the permission slip, his pen hovering over the signature line. Other parents would sign without a second thought, would probably give their children extra spending money for the gift shop. For David, this $60 meant choosing between the field trip and the phone bill, between his daughter's joy and keeping their utilities connected. The internal battle raged as he calculated and recalculated. He could pick up extra weekend shifts at Henderson's Market, where they sometimes needed help with loading deliveries. That would mean less time with Emma, but it might stretch the budget enough to cover both necessities and this small luxury. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor, extra shift available Saturday a.m., need answer by tomorrow. Saturday mornings were precious to David and Emma. They were for pancakes and cartoons, for bike rides in the park and lazy afternoons reading library books together. They were the foundation of their small family's happiness, the rhythm that kept them both grounded. But they were also expendable if it meant giving Emma experiences with her classmates, if it meant she didn't have to be the only child who couldn't afford the field trip. David signed the permission slip and immediately wrote a text accepting the Saturday shift. Emma would spend the morning with Mrs. Patterson, probably helping in her garden and learning to bake cookies. It wasn't the same as their father-daughter time, but it was the sacrifice that love required. As he sealed the envelope with Emma's field trip money, money that represented hours of overtime and careful budgeting, David thought about the conversation with Principal Rodriguez. He understood that the school's offers of help came from genuine concern, but accepting assistance felt like admitting failure as a father. He'd promised Sarah in those final moments at the hospital that he would take care of Emma, that their daughter would never want for anything important. But sitting in his quiet kitchen, surrounded by bills and impossible choices, David wondered if love and sacrifice were enough, or if Emma deserved a father who could give her more than constant worry disguised as security. The freight train's whistle echoed across the valley, carrying with it the dreams of people heading somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunities and fewer compromises. David listened until the sound faded, then gathered up his papers and headed to bed, setting his alarm for another early morning of making the best of what they had. Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected twist that would change everything. David's phone rang at 6:30 a.m., jolting him from the restless sleep that had become his norm. The caller ID showed Henderson's Market, and David's heart sank as he anticipated having to work the extra shift he'd reluctantly agreed to take. "David, I'm sorry to call so early," came the apologetic voice of Jim Henderson, the store owner. "My nephew flew in unexpectedly from Denver, and he needs the work more than we thought. I have to give today's shift to him. I know you were counting on those hours." After hanging up, David stared at the ceiling, calculating the financial impact. The lost wages meant the field trip money would have to come from somewhere else, probably the grocery budget. But as disappointment settled in his chest, he realized something unexpected. He had his Saturday morning with Emma back. "Daddy?" Emma appeared in his doorway, her hair a tangle of dark curls, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "I heard the phone. Do you have to work today?" "Change of plans, sweetheart. Looks like we get our Saturday together after all." Emma's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that reminded David why every sacrifice was worth it. "Can we go to the park? The one with the big swings?" An hour later, they were walking hand in hand down the tree-lined path toward Riverside Community Park. Emma chattered excitedly about her week, telling David about the book she was reading and her hopes for the upcoming field trip. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains and the promise of a beautiful spring day. "Look, Daddy." Emma pointed toward the playground area. "There's a boy with a really cool bike." David followed her gaze and saw a child, probably 8 or 9 years old, standing beside an expensive mountain bike that gleamed in the morning sunlight. Even from a distance, David could tell it was a high-end model, the kind he'd seen in the windows of specialty bike shops in larger cities, with components that cost more than his monthly grocery budget. As they drew closer, David noticed the boy's frustrated posture. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, and he was staring at his bike's front wheel with the kind of concentrated disappointment that David recognized from his own childhood struggles with mechanical problems. "Tommy Ashford," Emma read aloud from the name tag attached to the boy's backpack. "That's a nice name." The boy looked up at the sound of his name, his brown eyes wide with surprise. David could see tear tracks on his cheeks, and the sight tugged at every parental instinct he possessed. "Having some trouble there?" David called out gently, maintaining enough distance not to frighten the child. He glanced around the park, expecting to see a parent nearby, but the area was surprisingly empty for a Saturday morning. Tommy wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, a gesture so reminiscent of Emma when she was frustrated that David's heart clenched. "My bike wheel is all wobbly," Tommy said, his voice thick with disappointment. "I can't ride it, and I don't know how to fix it." Emma tugged on David's sleeve. "Daddy's really good at fixing things," she announced with 7-year-old confidence. "He fixed my bike when the chain came off, and he fixed our kitchen sink when it made that funny noise." David smiled at his daughter's faith in his abilities, though he suspected this expensive bike might require knowledge beyond his basic mechanical skills. Still, the boy looked so dejected that David felt compelled to at least take a look. "I'm David, and this is Emma," he said, approaching slowly and crouching down to Tommy's level. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy replied, then added with careful politeness. "Tommy Ashford. Are you really good at fixing bikes?" "I've learned out of necessity," David admitted honestly. "When you're a dad, you become a jack of all trades, whether you plan to or not. Mind if I take a look at what's going on with your wheel?" Tommy nodded eagerly, stepping back to give David room to examine the bike. As David knelt beside the impressive machine, he was struck by the quality of its construction. This wasn't a department store bike, or even a mid-range model from a bike shop. This was the kind of equipment that serious cyclists used, with components that David had only seen in magazines. The problem, however, was refreshingly simple. The front wheel's quick-release lever had been improperly tightened, causing the wheel to sit crooked in the fork. It was exactly the kind of issue that looked catastrophic to a child, but could be fixed in minutes with the right knowledge. "Well, Tommy, I have good news," David said, looking up at the boy's anxious face. "This isn't actually broken. Your wheel just needs to be properly seated and secured. Want to learn how to fix it yourself?" Tommy's eyes widened with interest. "You'd teach me? Really?" "Absolutely. The best way to solve a problem is to understand how it works. That way, if it happens again, you'll know exactly what to do." What David didn't know was that across the street, in the driver's seat of a sleek black Tesla, Victoria Ashford was watching every moment of this interaction with growing amazement. She had been following Tommy at a careful distance since he'd slipped out of their rental house an hour earlier, her heart pounding with a mixture of worry and something she couldn't quite identify. Victoria had grown up in boardrooms and conference calls, in a world where problems were solved by hiring experts or replacing broken things with new ones. She had built a tech empire worth billions, had revolutionized how people communicated across the globe, but she had never learned how to fix something as simple as a bicycle. For the past week, she had watched Tommy struggle with his bike, had seen his mounting frustration as he tried to figure out what was wrong. She had offered to call a repair service, had suggested they simply buy a new bike, but Tommy had insisted he wanted to learn how to fix things himself. The request had left Victoria feeling helpless in a way that no corporate challenge ever had. Now watching this stranger, this kind man with gentle hands and infinite patience, kneel in the gravel and offer to teach her son something she couldn't, Victoria felt a complex mix of emotions. There was gratitude, certainly, but also a sharp pang of recognition. This was what Tommy had been asking for. Not another expensive purchase or professional service, but someone who had time to teach him, someone who valued the process of learning over the convenience of quick fixes. Victoria raised her phone and began recording, not with any conscious plan but with the instinct of someone who had learned to document important moments. As she watched David begin to explain the mechanics of bicycle wheel alignment to her fascinated son, she realized she was witnessing something she had never been able to give Tommy herself. The patient guidance of someone who understood that teaching a child was more valuable than simply solving their problem for them. "All right, Tommy," David said, settling more comfortably on the gravel beside the bike. "The first thing about fixing anything is understanding what's supposed to happen when it works correctly. Can you tell me how you think this wheel should sit in the fork?" Tommy crouched down beside David, his earlier tears forgotten in the face of this new puzzle. "It should be straight," he ventured, pointing at the obviously crooked wheel. "Exactly right. And do you see these dropouts here?" David indicated the slots where the wheel axle rested. "The wheel needs to sit evenly in both of them. Right now, can you see how one side is deeper than the other?" Emma plopped down on the grass nearby, content to watch her father work his particular brand of patient magic. She had seen this before, the way David could take something that seemed impossibly broken and make it understandable, manageable, fixable. Tommy leaned in closer, his face scrunched in concentration. "Oh, I see it now. It's like it's sitting crooked in its chair." "That's a perfect way to think about it," David smiled, genuinely impressed by the boy's quick grasp of the concept. "Now, see this lever here? This is called a quick release. It's designed to let you remove the wheel easily for transport or repairs, but it has to be used correctly or the wheel won't sit properly." David's hands moved slowly and deliberately as he demonstrated, making sure Tommy could follow every step. "First, we open the lever completely. See how that releases all the tension? Now the wheel can move freely in the dropouts." Tommy watched with rapt attention as David lifted the front of the bike slightly and let the wheel settle naturally into its proper position. The crooked cant that had made the bike unrideable disappeared instantly. "Now comes the important part," David continued. "We need to make sure the wheel is centered before we tighten it down. Tommy, can you look at the wheel from the front and tell me if it looks straight between the fork legs?" The boy scrambled to the front of the bike, taking his new role as David's assistant seriously. "It looks good to me." "Perfect. Now here's where most people make the mistake that caused your problem in the first place. This quick release isn't just about making the lever tight, it's about understanding how the mechanism works." David showed Tommy the cam action of the quick release, explaining how the lever should start to feel resistance when it was halfway closed. If you just flip the lever shut without building up proper tension first, the wheel might seem secure, but it'll work loose as soon as you start riding. "So I need to turn this part first?" Tommy pointed to the adjustment nut on the opposite side of the wheel. "Exactly! You turn that until the lever starts to feel snug when you're closing it, but not so tight that you can't flip it closed." "Want to try?" Tommy's face lit up with the kind of pride that came from being trusted with real responsibility. His small fingers worked carefully with the adjustment nut, testing the lever tension repeatedly until David nodded approvingly. "That feels just right. Now, when you close the lever, it should require some effort. Not so easy that it might flip open accidentally, but not so hard that you need superhuman strength." As Tommy worked through the final steps, David found himself thinking about all the times he'd wished someone had taken this kind of time with him as a child. His own father had been a good man, but always rushing, always under pressure to get things done quickly. David had learned to fix things through trial and error, through broken knuckles and frustrated tears in the garage. "I did it!" Tommy's triumphant shout broke through David's reverie. The boy was beaming as he spun the front wheel, watching it rotate perfectly straight and true. "You absolutely did," David agreed, standing up and brushing gravel from his knees. "But we're not quite finished yet. The most important part of any repair is the test. Want to take it for a ride and see how it feels?" Tommy looked uncertain for the first time since they'd started working together. "What if I broke it again somehow?" "Then we'll figure out what went wrong and fix it again," David said simply. "That's how learning works. You try, you see what happens, and you adjust. Besides, I have confidence in your work. You followed every step perfectly." Emma jumped up from her spot on the grass. "Tommy, you should definitely try it. Daddy taught me how to adjust my bike seat, and now I can do it myself whenever I need to." With David's encouragement, Tommy climbed onto the bike and began pedaling slowly around the small loop of path near the playground. His initial tentative movements gave way to increasing confidence as the bike responded smoothly to his steering. "It's perfect," he called out as he completed his second lap. "It feels completely different." David felt the familiar warm satisfaction that came from solving a problem, but more than that, he felt the deeper contentment of seeing a child learn something new. This was why he had always thought he might have made a good teacher, like Sarah. There was something profoundly rewarding about watching understanding dawn in a young mind, about being part of that moment when confusion transformed into competence. "Remember," David called out as Tommy continued his victory laps, "if it ever starts feeling wobbly again, you know exactly what to check first." "The quick release!" Tommy shouted back, grinning broadly. What David couldn't see was Victoria Ashford sitting in her car across the street, tears streaming down her face as she continued recording. She had just watched a complete stranger give her son something she had never been able to provide. Not just a solution to his problem, but the knowledge and confidence to solve it himself. In her world of corporate efficiency and professional services, problems were delegated to experts and resolved through financial resources. She had never considered that Tommy might value the process of learning over the convenience of having things fixed for him. She had never realized that her son's repeated requests to figure things out himself weren't just childish stubbornness, but a genuine desire for the kind of hands-on guidance that David had just provided. As she watched Tommy's joyful circles around the park path, Victoria began to understand that there were some things that money couldn't buy, some forms of wealth that had nothing to do with financial resources. The patience, the knowledge, and the generosity of spirit that David had just demonstrated were treasures that couldn't be purchased or outsourced. For the first time in years, Victoria Ashford found herself wondering not how to solve a problem with money, but how to learn to solve it with her own hands and heart. After Tommy had completed several triumphant laps around the park path, he brought his bike to a stop near David and Emma, his face flushed with excitement and accomplishment. The transformation in the boy was remarkable. Gone was the frustrated, tearful child they had encountered earlier, replaced by someone radiating confidence and joy. "Thank you so much, Mr. David," Tommy said, carefully dismounting his bike and standing it upright with newfound respect for the machine. "I can't believe I actually fixed it myself." "You did all the work," David replied, meaning every word. "I just pointed you in the right direction." That's the best kind of learning, when you discover you can do more than you thought possible. Emma, who had been unusually quiet during the repair session, suddenly piped up. "Tommy, do you want to see the rest of the park? There's a really cool creek behind those trees, and sometimes you can see frogs." Tommy's eyes lit up at the suggestion, but then his expression grew uncertain. "I should probably get back home soon. My mom doesn't know where I am." David felt a flutter of concern. "She doesn't know you're at the park? Tommy, how did you get here?" "I walked," Tommy said, then quickly added, "It's not far. Just a few streets over. I left a note saying I was going for a bike ride, but then when the bike got all wobbly, I couldn't ride it anymore." His voice took on a slightly defensive tone. "I was going to go back as soon as I figured out how to fix it." David glanced around the park again, noting how isolated it was, how few people were around on this Saturday morning. The responsible parent in him was troubled by the idea of an 8-year-old wandering around alone, even in a safe community like Millbrook Valley. "Tell you what," David said, making a decision that felt natural and right. "Why don't Emma and I walk you home? We can make sure you get there safely, and maybe I can meet your mom and let her know what happened with the bike." Tommy's face brightened considerably. "Really? You'd walk with me?" "Of course," Emma chimed in. "That's what friends do, right?" As they began walking toward the park's exit, Tommy chattering excitedly about everything he'd learned about bike mechanics, David found himself reflecting on how unexpected the morning had become. He'd started the day disappointed about losing work hours and worried about money, but somehow this chance encounter had reminded him of what he truly valued: the opportunity to help, to teach, to make a positive difference in a child's life. The walk through Millbrook Valley's quiet residential streets gave David a chance to learn more about Tommy. The boy was articulate and curious, asking thoughtful questions about how other mechanical things worked. He mentioned that he and his mother were staying in town temporarily while she conducted some kind of business, though he was vague about the details. "We've been here for 2 weeks," Tommy explained as they turned onto Elm Street. "Mom has lots of meetings and phone calls, so I usually stay inside and read or play games on my tablet. But it gets boring, you know? That's why I wanted to explore on my bike." David exchanged a meaningful glance with Emma, both of them understanding the loneliness that colored Tommy's words. They knew what it felt like to spend long hours without much companionship, though for different reasons. "Well, now you know how to keep your bike running properly," David said, "and you know where Riverside Park is if you need a place to practice your repair skills." They stopped in front of a modest but well-maintained rental house with a small front yard and a porch swing. David was slightly surprised. Given the expensive bike and Tommy's clothes, he had expected something more upscale. But Millbrook Valley's rental options were limited, and perhaps Tommy's family valued practicality over luxury. "This is it," Tommy announced, carefully walking his bike up the front path. "Mom's probably wondering where I went." As if summoned by his words, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. David's first impression was of someone trying very hard to look casual. Designer jeans that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget, paired with a simple sweater that somehow managed to look both effortless and expensive. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and even without makeup, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from being accustomed to having her presence noticed and respected. "Tommy," she called out, relief evident in her voice. "I was just about to—" She stopped mid-sentence as she noticed David and Emma standing at the end of her walkway. "Mom, this is Mr. David and Emma," Tommy said, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement. "Mr. David taught me how to fix my bike. It was making that wobbly thing, and I thought it was broken forever, but it just needed the quick release thing adjusted properly. And now I know how to do it myself." The woman, who David assumed was Tommy's mother, looked between her son's animated face and the 2 strangers who had apparently spent their morning helping him. Her expression was complex, showing gratitude mixed with something that might have been embarrassment or uncertainty. "I'm Victoria," she said, stepping down from the porch and extending her hand to David. "Victoria Ashford, Tommy's mother. I can't thank you enough for helping him." "David Harrington," he replied, shaking her hand and noting the firmness of her grip. "And this is my daughter Emma. We were just at the park when we ran into Tommy having bike trouble. He taught me everything." Tommy continued, oblivious to the slightly awkward adult interaction taking place above his head. "About dropouts and cam action, and proper tension. And he said if it gets wobbly again, I'll know exactly what to check first." Victoria's eyes fixed on David with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "You took the time to teach him how to fix it himself?" "Well, yes," David said, wondering if he had somehow overstepped by not simply fixing the bike and sending Tommy on his way. "I figured if he understood how it worked, he'd be able to handle similar problems in the future." Something flickered across Victoria's face, an expression David couldn't quite interpret. For a moment, she seemed to be struggling with words, as if trying to process something unexpected. That's exactly what he's been asking me to do," she said quietly. "He keeps wanting to learn how things work, and I keep trying to find experts to fix things for him instead." The admission hung in the air between them, creating a moment of understanding that transcended their obvious differences in circumstance. David recognized the look in Victoria's eyes. It was the same expression he sometimes saw in his own mirror when he realized he'd missed something important about Emma's needs. "Well," David said gently, "sometimes the best expert is just someone willing to figure it out together with them." As they prepared to leave, Tommy ran up to David with something clutched in his small fist. "Mr. David, I want you to have this," he said, opening his hand to reveal a small, expensive-looking multi-tool. "It's got screwdrivers and everything. For the next time you need to fix something." David started to protest. The tool was clearly valuable, far more than appropriate for a child to give away, but the look of pure generosity on Tommy's face stopped him. This wasn't about the monetary value. It was about a child wanting to give something meaningful to someone who had given him something precious. "Thank you, Tommy," David said, accepting the gift with appropriate solemnity. "I'll think of you every time I use it." As David and Emma walked home, the small multi-tool weighing surprisingly heavy in David's pocket, neither of them could have imagined that their simple act of kindness had been recorded in its entirety, or that Victoria Ashford was already planning how to thank them properly for giving her son something she had never been able to provide herself. 3 days passed in the familiar rhythm of David's routine. Monday brought another long shift at the manufacturing plant. Tuesday met Emma's school conference where Principal Rodriguez mentioned how much happier Emma seemed lately, and Wednesday delivered the usual stack of bills that David sorted through with practiced resignation. The encounter with Tommy at the park had settled into the category of pleasant memories, a reminder that sometimes good deeds were their own reward. David was fixing Emma's lunch on Thursday morning, carefully spreading peanut butter on day-old bread and adding sliced banana for sweetness, when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with an area code he didn't recognize. David Harrington? The voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably that of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Yes, this is David. My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm calling on behalf of Victoria Ashford regarding an incident involving her son Tommy and your assistance this past Saturday. David's stomach tightened. In his experience, formal phone calls about interactions with other people's children rarely brought good news. Had he overstepped somehow? Had Victoria decided that his help was inappropriate? Is everything all right? He asked, turning away from Emma, who was eating her cereal at the kitchen table with the focused attention she brought to most morning tasks. Oh yes, absolutely, Jennifer's voice warmed considerably. Ms. Ashford wanted me to call and express her gratitude for your kindness to Tommy. She was quite moved by what you did for him. Relief flooded through David. It was nothing, really. Just a simple bike repair. Tommy did most of the work himself once he understood how it functioned. Yes, that's exactly what made such an impression, Jennifer continued. Ms. Ashford wondered if you might be available to meet with her later today. She has a proposition she'd like to discuss with you. David frowned, unsure what kind of proposition a temporary resident of Millbrook Valley might have for a factory worker. What sort of proposition? She'd prefer to discuss it in person, if you're amenable. Would this afternoon work? Say around 2 p.m. at the Millbrook Valley Inn? The Millbrook Valley Inn was the town's only upscale establishment, a restored Victorian house that served as both a restaurant and a meeting place for the few business travelers who passed through. David had never eaten there. The prices were well beyond his budget, but he'd driven past it countless times. I suppose I could meet her, David said slowly. But I have to pick up my daughter from school at 3:15. That's perfect. This shouldn't take long. After hanging up, David stared at his phone, trying to imagine what Victoria Ashford might want to discuss that required a formal meeting. Emma looked up from her cereal, her intuitive radar detecting his confusion. Who was that, Daddy? Someone calling about Tommy, the boy we helped at the park. His mom wants to meet with me today. Is Tommy okay? Yes, sweetheart. I think his mom just wants to say thank you properly. At 1:50 p.m., David stood outside the Millbrook Valley Inn, acutely aware that his best clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, still marked him as someone who didn't belong in places like this. The inn's elegant facade and manicured gardens spoke of a world where people had money to spend on atmosphere and ambiance rather than pure necessity. The hostess, a young woman with the kind of polished appearance that came from working in hospitality, greeted him with professional warmth. Mr. Harrington? Miss Ashford is waiting for you in the private dining room. David followed her through the inn's main dining area, past tables set with white linens and crystal glasses, toward a smaller room at the back of the building. When the hostess opened the door, David stepped into what felt like a different universe. Victoria Ashford sat at a small table near a window overlooking the inn's garden. She was dressed differently than she had been at her rental house, more formally, in what David's inexperienced eye recognized as expensive business attire. But what struck him most was the nervous energy she radiated, the way her fingers drummed silently against the table as if she were preparing for a difficult conversation. David, she said, rising to shake his hand, thank you so much for coming. Please, sit down. As David settled into the chair across from her, he noticed a tablet and several folders arranged neatly on the table. This felt more like a business meeting than a simple thank you conversation. Can I order you something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Victoria asked. Coffee would be fine, thank you. After the server had taken their order and left them alone, Victoria seemed to struggle with how to begin. She opened one of the folders. then closed it again, her usual confidence apparently deserting her. "I want to start by saying that what you did for Tommy on Saturday was extraordinary," she finally said. "Not just the bike repair, but the way you approached it. The patience you showed, the respect you gave him." "Any parent would have done the same thing," David replied, genuinely confused by her intensity. "No," Victoria said firmly, "they wouldn't have. Most people would have fixed the bike and sent him on his way. You took the time to teach him, to make him understand how it worked so he could handle it himself in the future." She paused, seeming to gather herself for what came next. "David, I need to be honest with you about something. I wasn't entirely truthful when we met on Saturday." David felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the kind that preceded bad news or uncomfortable revelations. Victoria took a deep breath. "My full name is Victoria Ashford, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ashford Technologies. We develop communication software and platforms. The company is quite successful." The name meant nothing to David, but the way she said it suggested it should. "Okay," he said carefully. "What I'm trying to say is that I have considerable resources at my disposal," Victoria continued. "And after watching how you interacted with Tommy, after seeing what you were able to give him that I couldn't, I want to find a way to express my gratitude that goes beyond just saying thank you." David's discomfort was growing by the minute. "Ms. Ashford, I appreciate the sentiment, but I really don't need anything. Helping Tommy was its own reward." "Please, just hear me out," Victoria said, opening the folder and revealing what appeared to be financial documents. "I've done some research into your situation. I know about the manufacturing plant, about your financial circumstances, about the challenges you face as a single parent." The blood drained from David's face. "You investigated me?" "Not investigated," Victoria said quickly, clearly recognizing his alarm. "But I wanted to understand who you were, what your life was like. David, you have something that all my money and success can't buy. You have the ability to connect with children, to teach them, to make them feel valued and capable." She leaned forward, her eyes intense with purpose. "I want to offer you a job, David. A position with my company that would allow you to use those skills on a much larger scale, while providing you and Emma with the kind of security and opportunities that you deserve." The room seemed to spin slightly around David. A job offer. From a CEO, based on 20 minutes of bike repair in a park. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "What kind of job could I possibly do for a technology company?" "I work in manufacturing. I assemble hydraulic components." Victoria smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "That's exactly the point, David. You have something that my company desperately needs. The ability to take complex things and make them understandable, to teach with patience and clarity. I want you to head up our new Educational Initiatives program." She opened the tablet and showed him a detailed proposal, complete with salary figures that made David's heart race. The amount was more than triple what he made at the manufacturing plant, with benefits that included health insurance, education funds, and relocation assistance. "This is impossible," David whispered, staring at numbers that represented a completely different life for him and Emma. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything," Victoria replied. "David, you changed something fundamental for Tommy in that park. You showed him that learning and understanding are more valuable than having problems solved for you. That's a philosophy I want to bring to everything my company does." The implications began to crash over David like waves. Moving away from Millbrook Valley, leaving behind everything familiar, starting over in a world he knew nothing about. But also, no more choosing between field trips and phone bills. No more lying awake calculating and recalculating expenses. No more watching Emma pretend not to notice their limitations. "I need time to think," David said, his voice barely steady. "Of course," Victoria said. "Take all the time you need. But David, I hope you'll seriously consider this. What you have, the ability to see potential in others and help them realize it. That's the rarest gift in the world." David drove home from the Millbrook Valley Inn in a daze, Victoria's business card burning a hole in his shirt pocket alongside the formal job offer she had printed out for him to review. The familiar streets of his hometown looked different somehow, as if he were seeing them through a lens that had shifted without warning. The modest houses, the small businesses, the mountains that had always felt like protective barriers now seemed to represent something else entirely. the boundaries of the life he had always known. Emma was waiting on Mrs. Patterson's front porch when he pulled up, her school backpack at her feet, and her face bright with the kind of excitement that usually meant she had something important to share. "Daddy, guess what happened at school today?" she called out, bounding down the steps toward his truck. "What's that, sweetheart?" David asked, trying to push Victoria's offer from his mind long enough to focus on his daughter's news. "Mrs. Martinez said my science project about simple machines was so good that I get to present it at the district showcase next month. All the other schools will be there, and parents can come watch." David felt a surge of pride mixed with the familiar pang of financial worry. The district showcase was held in the state capitol, 2 hours away. It would mean time off work, gas money for the drive, probably a meal out since they'd be gone all day. "That's wonderful, Em," he said, lifting her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." As they walked into their house, Emma chattering about her project and the other students who had been selected, David found himself calculating costs automatically. Then he stopped, remembering the salary figure Victoria had shown him. If he took that job, the cost of a trip to support Emma's achievement would be negligible. In fact, everything that currently required careful budgeting and strategic planning would become simple, automatic decisions. "Daddy?" Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "You look funny. Are you okay?" David realized he had been standing in their living room, staring at nothing, while Emma waited for his response to something she had said. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I had an interesting meeting today, and I'm still thinking about it." "What kind of meeting?" David sat down on their worn couch, and Emma immediately curled up beside him, her small body warm against his side. How could he explain Victoria's offer to a 7-year-old? How could he make her understand that their entire life might be about to change? "Remember Tommy, the boy we helped at the park? His mother wanted to thank us for helping him." "That's nice," Emma said. "Did she make you cookies?" "Mrs. Patterson always makes cookies when she wants to thank people." David smiled despite his inner turmoil. "Not cookies. She offered me a different job. A really good job that would pay more money than I make at the factory." Emma's eyes widened. "Would we have to move?" "Yes, we would. To a big city, far away from here." The room fell quiet except for the familiar sounds of their old house, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the distant rumble of a freight train making its evening run through the valley. These sounds had been the soundtrack of Emma's entire life, just as they had been the soundtrack of David's childhood. "Would I have to go to a different school?" Emma asked quietly. "Yes, you would." "Would I have to leave Mrs. Patterson and my friends?" Each question felt like a small blade. "Yes, Em. But you'd make new friends. And we could visit Mrs. Patterson." Emma was quiet for a long time, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Finally, she looked up at him with Sarah's eyes. "Daddy, would this job make you happy?" The question caught him off guard. In all his mental calculations about money and opportunities and Emma's future, he hadn't considered his own happiness as a factor in the decision. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "It's very different from what I do now. It would involve teaching people things, helping them learn new skills." "Like you helped Tommy?" "Yes, like that." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "You're good at teaching. You taught me how to ride my bike, and how to make pancakes, and how to tie my shoes the special way that doesn't come undone." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, David spread Victoria's offer across his kitchen table alongside his monthly bills. The contrast was stark and overwhelming. On one side, read final notice stamps and calculated risks about which payments could be delayed. On the other, a salary that would eliminate every financial worry he'd carried for years. But it wasn't just about money, and David knew it. Victoria had seen something in him that he wasn't sure he saw in himself. She had looked at 20 minutes of bike repair instruction and somehow extrapolated a vision of corporate educational programs and leadership potential. David picked up his phone and dialed his sister Rebecca's number. She lived 3 states away with her husband and 2 kids, working as a nurse practitioner in a busy medical practice. Rebecca had always been the ambitious one, the sibling who had left Millbrook Valley for bigger opportunities. "David, is everything okay?" Rebecca's voice carried immediate concern. Phone calls between them were usually reserved for holidays and emergencies. "I need advice, Becca. Something incredible and terrifying has happened. He told her about Tommy, about Victoria, about the job offer that seemed too good to be true. Rebecca listened without interrupting, asking clarifying questions only when necessary. "My God, David," she said when he finished. "Do you know who Victoria Ashford is?" She said she runs a technology company. She doesn't just run it, she built it from nothing. Ashford Technologies is worth billions. Their communication platforms are used by companies all over the world. If Victoria Ashford personally offered you a job, it's because she sees something extraordinary in you. But I don't know anything about technology companies or educational programs or corporate leadership. You think I knew anything about advanced nursing practice when I started? You think anyone knows what they're doing when they take a leap into something bigger than they've done before? Rebecca's voice grew intense. "David, you've been playing it safe your entire life. You married your high school sweetheart, took a factory job in your hometown, never pushed yourself to see what you might be capable of." The words stung because they contained truth. David had chosen security and familiarity over ambition and risk at every turn. But what about Emma? She's settled here, she has friends, she knows this place. "Emma is 7 years old," Rebecca said gently. "Kids are resilient. And think about what you'd be giving her. Better schools, more opportunities, exposure to a bigger world. Think about the example you'd be setting by showing her that sometimes we have to be brave enough to reach for something better." After they hung up, David walked through his small house, seeing it with new eyes. The water stain on the bedroom ceiling. The kitchen faucet that dripped no matter how tightly he turned it. The living room carpet with permanent stains from Emma's childhood accidents. The stack of repair projects he never had time or money to tackle. He had built a life of making do, of careful compromises and deferred dreams. But what if Emma deserved more than just getting by? What if she deserved a father who was willing to bet on himself, who believed he might be capable of something greater than he had ever imagined? In his pocket, Tommy's multi-tool caught the light from the kitchen lamp. Such a small gift from a child who had received something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that he could figure things out, that understanding was within his reach, if someone would just take the time to show him the way. Maybe that was Victoria's real offer, not just a job, but the chance to discover who David Harrington might become if he stopped limiting himself to who he had always been. The decision, David realized, wasn't really about the money or the job title or the corporate benefits. It was about whether he had the courage to find out what he was truly capable of when given the chance to grow beyond the safe boundaries of everything familiar. Friday morning arrived with an unexpected phone call that would force David's hand sooner than he had anticipated. The voice on the other end belonged to his supervisor at Millbrook Manufacturing, and the news was exactly what David had been dreading since rumors started circulating weeks earlier. "David, I need you to come in early today. We're having a mandatory meeting at 7 a.m. about the restructuring." The word restructuring hit David like a physical blow. In corporate speak, it was a polite way of saying layoffs were coming. He had suspected this moment was approaching, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach drop. "How bad is it, Mike?" David asked, already knowing he didn't want to hear the answer. "Bad enough. I can't say more over the phone, but you should probably start thinking about your options." After hanging up, David sat in his kitchen, staring at Victoria's business card. The universe, it seemed, was making his decision for him. The meeting at the plant was as grim as David had expected. 40% of the workforce would be eliminated over the next 6 weeks. While David's seniority protected him from the immediate cuts, the writing was on the wall. Millbrook Manufacturing was downsizing to survival mode, and there would be no overtime, no raises, and probably more layoffs in the future. David drove straight from the plant to the Millbrook Valley Inn, asking the hostess if Victoria was available to meet. Within minutes, he was back in the same private dining room where his world had been turned upside down just 2 days earlier. "David," Victoria said, rising as he entered, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." "My circumstances have changed," he said simply. "The factory is laying off workers. My job is probably safe for now, but the long-term outlook isn't good." Victoria's expression shifted to one of genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. How are you feeling about it?" David had expected her to press her advantage, to use his newfound vulnerability to sweeten her offer or push for a quick decision. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in his emotional state. "Scared," he admitted, "but also maybe relieved. I've been so focused on holding on to what I have that I never considered what I might be capable of achieving. Tell me what you're thinking." David took a deep breath, feeling as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump. "I want to accept your offer, but I need to understand exactly what I'd be walking into. You said educational initiatives, but what does that actually mean?" Victoria's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I'll show you." She opened her tablet and pulled up a presentation that was clearly her passion project. Ashford Technologies has always focused on helping people communicate better, but we've realized that communication is just the surface level. The real challenge is helping people learn about technology, about each other, about their own potential. The screen showed mock-ups of interactive learning platforms, videos of corporate training sessions, and testimonials from employees who had participated in pilot programs. What you did with Tommy, breaking down a complex problem into understandable steps, building his confidence while teaching him skills, that's exactly the approach we want to bring to everything we do. Adults learn the same way children do. They just need someone who believes in their ability to understand. David studied the presentation, seeing familiar principles dressed up in corporate language. This is just good teaching. Exactly, but most corporate training treats people like empty vessels to be filled with information instead of curious minds to be engaged. You understand the difference instinctively. You understood. Victoria pulled up another screen showing the organizational chart for the new division. You'd start as Director of Educational Development, with a team of instructional designers and content creators reporting to you. Your job would be to ensure that everything we create follows the principles you demonstrated with Tommy: patience, respect for the learner, and focus on understanding rather than just information transfer. The title alone made David's head spin. Director. He had never been in charge of anything more complex than his own workstation at the factory. "Victoria, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I've never managed a team. I've never worked in corporate environment. I don't even own a suit." Victoria laughed, the first truly relaxed sound he had heard from her. "David, I built a multi-billion-dollar company wearing jeans and sneakers. What you wear matters far less than how you think and how you treat people." She leaned forward, her expression growing serious. "I'm not offering you this position because I need someone who already knows how to do the job. I'm offering it to you because I need someone who can reinvent how the job should be done. Every educational consultant and corporate trainer I've worked with approaches learning like an assembly line. Input, process, output. You approach it like a craftsman. Individual attention, custom solutions, mastery over efficiency." David felt something shifting inside him, a recognition of possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. What about Emma? Would she be able to attend good schools? The best schools in the city, if that's what you want. Or private schools. Or innovative programs that might be better suited to her interests. You'd have options that don't exist in Millbrook Valley. And if I fail? If I'm not what you think I am? Victoria's expression grew gentle. "David, you've spent years succeeding at one of the hardest jobs in the world, being a single parent who raises a kind, intelligent, confident child. You've already proven you can handle more responsibility than most people ever face." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "But I want to be honest with you about something else. I didn't just happen to be in Millbrook Valley on business. I came here specifically to meet you after I saw the video." David's confusion must have shown on his face, because Victoria immediately pulled out her phone. "I recorded the entire interaction between you and Tommy in the park. I was sitting in my car across the street, and I filmed everything. The bike repair, the teaching, the way you treated my son like his questions mattered." She showed him the video, and David watched himself kneel in the gravel beside Tommy's bike, his voice patient and encouraging as he guided the boy through each step of the repair. Seeing it from Victoria's perspective, David began to understand what had moved her so deeply. "I've watched this video dozens of times," Victoria continued. "I've shown it to my senior staff, to educational consultants, to child development experts. Everyone has the same reaction. This is what learning should look like. This is how people should be treated when they're struggling with something new." David stared at the screen, seeing himself through different eyes. In the video, he looked competent, caring, naturally suited to teaching. He looked like someone who knew what he was doing. I posted this video on my personal social media account with Tommy's permission, Victoria said quietly. It's been viewed over 2 million times. People are calling you the bike repair teacher and sharing their own stories about adults who took time to really teach them something important. The revelation hit David like a wave. Millions of people had watched him teach Tommy about bike repair. Millions of strangers had seen value in something he had considered unremarkable. David, Victoria said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, you have a gift that the world needs. You can take this gift and use it to impact thousands of people through the programs we build together, or you can keep it in Millbrook Valley, where it will touch the lives of the few people lucky enough to encounter you directly. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm asking you to become more fully who you already are, just on a larger stage. For the first time since this extraordinary sequence of events had begun, David felt the fog of uncertainty lifting. He thought about Emma's question about whether the job would make him happy, and he realized that happiness wasn't really the right word for what he was feeling. This was about purpose, about the possibility that his natural instincts to help and teach might be exactly what the world needed from him. About the chance to discover whether the man who had patiently guided a frustrated child through a bike repair might be capable of guiding thousands of adults through their own moments of learning and growth. When would you need an answer? David asked. Take the weekend, Victoria replied. But David, I hope you'll say yes. I think this could change both of our lives in ways we can't even imagine yet. Saturday morning found David pacing his small living room at 5 a.m., unable to sleep for the third night in a row. Emma would be awake soon, and he knew he needed to make his decision before involving her in another conversation about their uncertain future. The weight of choosing not just for himself but for his daughter pressed down on him like a physical force. He picked up his phone and dialed Victoria's number, knowing that someone in her position probably started their days early. David, Victoria's voice was alert, as if she had been expecting his call. Have you made your decision? Yes, he said, the word coming out stronger than he had expected. I want to accept your offer. We'll do it. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that David began to worry Victoria had changed her mind. David, you have no idea how happy that makes me, she finally said, and he could hear genuine emotion in her voice. Tommy is going to be thrilled. He's been asking every day if you were going to come work with us. There's just one thing, David said. I need to finish out my notice at the factory properly. I've worked with these people for years, and some of them are facing layoffs. I can't just disappear. Of course, take whatever time you need. We'll start the relocation process whenever you're ready. After hanging up, David felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. He had just committed to leaving everything familiar and launching himself into a completely unknown future. But for the first time in years, that future felt full of possibility rather than just careful survival. Emma found him making pancakes an hour later, and she immediately noticed the difference in his demeanor. You look different, Daddy. Happy different. I made a decision about that job, Em. We're going to take it. Emma's eyes widened, and David watched her process the full implications. So we're really going to move to a big city? Yes, we are. Are you scared? Emma considered this seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. A little bit, but also excited. Will I still be able to call Mrs. Patterson? Of course, and we'll come back to visit whenever you want. And will you really be teaching people things, like you taught Tommy? That's exactly what I'll be doing. Emma nodded decisively. Then we should definitely do it. You're the best teacher I know. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of logistics and emotional goodbyes. Victoria's assistant Jennifer proved to be remarkably efficient, coordinating everything from house hunters to school enrollment to shipping companies. Within days, David had more support for this major life transition than he had ever had for any decision. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Mrs. Patterson, who had been Emma's surrogate grandmother since Sarah's death. The elderly woman tried to hide her tears as she pressed a bag of homemade cookies into Emma's hands and promised to send more by mail. You're doing the right thing, David, she said, patting his arm with her weathered hand. Sarah would be so proud of you for being brave enough to reach for something better. David's last day at Millbrook Manufacturing was both melancholy and liberating. His co-workers had organized a small farewell gathering, and several of them pulled him aside to express their envy and admiration. "Always knew you were too smart for this place," said Pete from the assembly line next to his. "Go show those corporate types how it's done." The drive to their new city took 6 hours, with Emma alternating between excited chatter about their upcoming adventure and quiet moments of sadness about leaving Millbrook Valley. David felt the same mixture of emotions, watching familiar landmarks disappear in his rearview mirror while trying to imagine the life that waited ahead. Their new home was a revelation. Victoria had arranged for them to rent a spacious 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with excellent schools, and David's first month's salary had been advanced to cover deposits and moving expenses. After years of carefully calculating every purchase, David found himself in the surreal position of being able to say yes to Emma's requests without mental math. "Daddy, can we get the good cereal?" Emma asked during their first grocery store trip. "Sure, sweetheart, get whatever cereal you want." Emma stared at him suspiciously. "The expensive kind? With the real strawberries?" "The expensive kind with real strawberries." David's first day at Ashford Technologies was unlike anything he had imagined. The building itself was a marvel of modern architecture, all glass and steel and open spaces designed to foster collaboration. But what struck him most was the atmosphere. People seemed genuinely excited to be there, passionate about their work in a way that David had never experienced in a manufacturing environment. Victoria met him in the lobby personally, introducing him to what felt like dozens of people whose titles and responsibilities blurred together in David's overwhelmed mind. But everyone he met echoed the same sentiment. They had watched the viral video of him teaching Tommy, and they were excited to see how his approach could transform their educational programs. "Don't try to learn everyone's names today," Victoria said as they walked toward his new office. "Just focus on getting comfortable and understanding what we're trying to build here." David's office was larger than his entire living room had been in Millbrook Valley, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. On his desk was a welcome basket from his new team, along with a card signed by people he hadn't met yet, expressing their enthusiasm for working with him. "This is overwhelming," David admitted to Victoria as they sat in his office, looking out at the bustling city below. "I imagine it is, but David, I want you to remember something. You're not here because I'm doing you a favor. You're here because you have something we desperately need. These people are excited to work with you because they recognize that you know something about teaching and learning that they've been trying to figure out for years." That afternoon, David attended his first team meeting, where he was introduced to the instructional designers, content creators, and project managers who would be implementing his vision. As they discussed their current projects and challenges, David began to see familiar patterns, the same frustrations he had observed in Emma when she struggled with homework, the same breakthrough moments he had witnessed when Tommy understood how his bike worked. "What if we approach this differently?" David found himself saying during a discussion about employee onboarding programs. "Instead of trying to download information into people's brains, what if we help them discover the knowledge themselves?" The room fell quiet, and David worried he had overstepped. Then Sarah Martinez, the senior instructional designer, leaned forward with interest. "What would that look like practically?" David thought about Tommy's bike, about the way the boy's face had lit up when he understood not just what to do, but why it worked. "We start with problems they can relate to, things that matter to them personally. We ask questions that lead them to the answers instead of just giving them the answers. We make sure they understand each step before moving to the next one." "Like scaffolding learning," said Marcus, one of the younger team members. "Building understanding piece by piece." "Exactly, and we make sure they feel safe to make mistakes because mistakes are just information about what to try next." As the meeting continued, David felt something clicking into place. These weren't foreign concepts requiring him to become someone different. These were extensions of everything he had always done naturally as a parent and as a human being who cared about helping others succeed. Walking back to his apartment that evening, David called Rebecca to update her on his first day. "It sounds like you're exactly where you're supposed to be," she said after he described the meeting and his team's response to his ideas. "It's strange," David admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to realize they made a mistake, that I don't actually know what I'm doing." "David, you've been doing this your whole life. You just never had a platform big enough to show how good you are at it." That night, as David tucked Emma into her new bedroom, she looked up at him with the same serious expression she had worn when processing their move. "Daddy, I think we made the right choice." "What makes you say that?" "You sound like you again." Like how you used to sound when Mommy was here, before everything got so worried all the time. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. He hadn't realized how much his constant financial stress had affected not just his own happiness, but Emma's sense of security. I love you, Em. Thank you for being brave enough to take this adventure with me. I love you too, Daddy, and I think Mommy would be really proud of us. As David settled into his own bed that night, surrounded by boxes still waiting to be unpacked and the unfamiliar sounds of city life outside his window, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. For the first time since Sarah's death, the future felt full of potential rather than just obstacles to navigate. 20 minutes of teaching a boy to fix his bike had somehow led to this: a new career, a new home, a new version of himself that he was only beginning to discover. And somehow, David thought as he drifted off to sleep, he had a feeling this was just the beginning. 6 months after David's first day at Ashford Technologies, the full scope of what his simple act of kindness had set in motion became clear in ways that no one could have anticipated. The educational programs he had developed were not just successful. They were revolutionary, transforming how the company approached everything from employee training to customer support to product development. The breakthrough had come during David's 3rd month, when he proposed something that initially seemed counterintuitive to the corporate mindset: slowing down the learning process instead of accelerating it. Traditional corporate training aimed to download maximum information in minimum time, but David's approach focused on deep understanding and practical application. We're not trying to create human databases, David had explained to the executive team during a presentation that would become legendary within the company. We're trying to create confident problem solvers who can think through challenges they've never encountered before. The pilot program had been launched with the customer service department, where employee turnover was high and customer satisfaction scores were frustratingly inconsistent. Instead of the typical 2-week information dump, David designed a 6-week program that taught customer service representatives not just what to say, but how to think through problems the way he had taught Tommy to understand his bike. The results were unprecedented. Customer satisfaction scores increased by 40%. Employee retention in the customer service department went from 60% to 95%. Most remarkably, the representatives began solving complex problems that would previously have required escalation to management. They're not just following scripts anymore, observed Jennifer Walsh, who had become David's primary liaison with Victoria's executive team. They're actually understanding the underlying principles of good customer service and applying them creatively to each unique situation. Word of the program's success spread throughout the tech industry faster than David could have imagined. Other companies began reaching out to Ashford Technologies, asking if they could license David's educational methodology. Tech industry publications wrote articles about the Harrington method, describing it as a revolutionary approach to corporate learning that treated employees as intelligent collaborators rather than passive recipients of information. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had been assembling hydraulic components just months earlier, but David found himself energized rather than intimidated by the challenges. Each new project allowed him to explore different applications of the same fundamental principle: respect for the learner's intelligence and capacity for growth. The ripple effects extended far beyond Ashford Technologies. David's viral video of teaching Tommy had sparked a broader conversation about education and mentorship that was reaching millions of people. Parents began sharing their own stories of teaching moments, educators started adopting his patient, question-based approach, and corporate trainers across multiple industries began requesting workshops on his methodology. Victoria had been right about the platform effect. David's natural teaching ability, which had previously touched only the lives of Emma and the occasional child like Tommy, was now influencing educational approaches in companies across 3 continents. But perhaps the most profound impact was one that David discovered entirely by accident during a routine company meeting. He was presenting quarterly results when Victoria interrupted with an unexpected announcement. Before David continues, she said, addressing the room full of executives and department heads, I want to share something that puts these numbers in perspective. She pulled up a slide that David had never seen before. A compilation of employee testimonials from across the company, not just from his educational programs, but from every department. Listen to what people are saying about working here now, Victoria continued, and began reading quotes that made David's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. I actually look forward to Monday mornings because I know I'll learn something new and interesting. For the first time in my career, I feel like my managers trust me to think for myself instead of just following orders. This company treats me like I have a brain and ideas worth hearing. I've never worked anywhere that invested so much in helping me understand not just what to do, but why it matters. Victoria looked directly at David as she read the final quote. Working here feels like having the best teacher I never had in school, someone who believes I'm capable of more than I thought possible. The room was quiet as the implications sank in. David's approach to education hadn't just improved training programs, it had fundamentally shifted the company culture. The respect for learning and growth that he had brought to his department had spread organically throughout the organization. David, Victoria said, when I offered you this job, I thought I was hiring someone to improve our educational programs. I didn't realize I was bringing in someone who would transform how we think about human potential. After the meeting, David found himself standing alone in his office, looking out at the city skyline and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. A single moment of kindness in a small-town park had created ripples that were now touching thousands of lives across the globe. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unexpected source. Tommy. Mr. David, Mom showed me the article about you in the business magazine. I'm so proud that you're my friend. Also, my bike is still working perfectly, and I taught my cousin how to fix his skateboard wheels using the same principles you showed me. Hope you and Emma are doing great in your new city. The message was accompanied by a photo of Tommy beaming proudly next to his cousin, both boys holding tools and looking like they had just conquered the world through mechanical mastery. David smiled, remembering Victoria's words about treating people like they had brains and ideas worth hearing. Tommy had internalized those lessons and was now passing them on to others, creating his own ripples of confidence and competence. Emma's voice in the hallway interrupted his reflection. She was home from her new school, which she had adapted to with the same resilience she had shown throughout their major life transition. "Daddy, you won't believe what happened in science class today," she called out as she entered his office, dropping her backpack and settling into the chair across from his desk with the familiarity of someone who knew she was always welcome. "Tell me everything," David said, giving her his full attention in the way that had started this entire extraordinary journey. Mrs. Chen was trying to explain how pulleys work, but nobody was getting it, so I raised my hand and asked if I could show them the way you taught me about simple machines, by actually building one and testing it instead of just looking at pictures. Emma's eyes were bright with excitement as she continued. She said yes, so we spent the whole class period building pulley systems and seeing how they made it easier to lift heavy things. Everyone finally understood because they could see it working and try it themselves. David felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest. What did Mrs. Chen say about that? She asked me where I learned to teach like that, and I told her it was from you. She said maybe I'd make a good teacher someday. Like my dad. Looking at his daughter's confident, happy face, David realized that the most important impact of this entire experience might be the example he had set for Emma herself. By taking the risk to bet on his own potential, he had shown her that growth and change were possible at any stage of life, that kindness and competence could open doors that seemed permanently closed, and that sometimes the scariest decisions led to the most rewarding outcomes. "You know what, Em?" David said, reaching across his desk to ruffle her hair in their old familiar gesture. "I think you'd make an excellent teacher. You've got all the right instincts." "I learned from the best," she replied with a grin that reminded him so much of Sarah that his heart ached in the most beautiful way. As father and daughter settled in to review Emma's homework together, a ritual that remained constant despite all the changes in their lives, David marveled at how a simple decision to help a frustrated child had somehow led to this moment of complete contentment. Every risk had been worth it. Every moment of uncertainty had led to something better than he could have imagined. The bike repair that had taken 20 minutes had ultimately repaired much more than Tommy's wobbly wheel. It had repaired David's faith in his own potential and set in motion a chain of events that was still creating positive change in ways that rippled far beyond anything he could see or measure. 1 year after that fateful Saturday morning in Riverside Community Park, David Harrington found himself standing on a stage he never could have imagined occupying, delivering the keynote address at the International Conference on Educational Innovation. The auditorium was filled with educators, corporate trainers, and business leaders from around the world, all gathered to hear from the man whose simple act of kindness had sparked a revolution in how people thought about learning and human potential. But this wasn't where David's story was meant to end. It was where it was meant to begin reaching its true purpose. "A year ago," David said into the microphone, his voice carrying the same patient warmth that had comforted Tommy in the park, "I was assembling hydraulic components in a small-town factory, worried about paying my electric bill, and wondering if I was giving my daughter enough opportunities. I never imagined I would be standing here today, and I certainly never imagined that 20 minutes of bike repair would change not just my life, but the lives of thousands of people I've never met." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, each representing someone who was struggling with their own challenges, their own dreams deferred, their own potential waiting to be recognized. "But I'm not here to talk about my story. I'm here to talk about yours. Because every single person in this room has something that the world desperately needs, the ability to see potential in others and help them realize it. The question isn't whether you have this gift. The question is whether you're willing to use it." David clicked to his first slide, which showed the viral video that had started everything, a simple scene of a man kneeling beside a child's bicycle in a small park. "This moment happened because I made 3 simple choices that anyone can make, anywhere, at any time. First, I chose to notice someone who needed help. Second, I chose to believe that person was capable of learning. And third, I chose to invest my time in teaching rather than just solving the problem for them." The audience was silent, absorbed in the simplicity of the message. Notice, believe, invest. 3 choices that cost nothing but time and attention. Yet they have the power to transform lives in ways we can't even imagine. David shared stories from the past year. Employees who had discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. Students who had found confidence they thought was beyond their reach. Managers who had learned to see their teams as collaborators rather than subordinates. Each story followed the same pattern. Someone chose to notice, believe, and invest in another person's potential. "But here's what I've learned that surprised me most," David continued. "When you help someone else discover what they're capable of, you discover something about yourself too. You realize that you have more to offer than you ever imagined." He told them about Maria, a customer service representative who had gone from struggling with basic inquiries to designing training programs for new hires. About James, a maintenance worker who had become the company's leading expert on sustainable building practices after someone took time to nurture his environmental interests. About Sarah Martinez, his instructional designer, who had started a nonprofit teaching digital literacy to elderly residents in underserved communities. Every single one of these transformations started the same way mine did, with someone choosing to see potential instead of problems, to offer teaching instead of just solutions, to believe that growth is possible at any stage of life. David's voice grew more passionate as he reached the heart of his message. We live in a world that's obsessed with quick fixes and instant results. We want apps that solve problems for us, experts who handle our challenges, systems that make everything faster and easier. But what we really need, what we're all hungry for, is someone who believes we're capable of learning, growing, and becoming more than we are right now. He clicked to a slide showing Tommy, now 9 years old, teaching a group of younger children how to maintain their bikes at a community center in Millbrook Valley. This is Tommy Ashford, the boy whose broken bike started this entire journey. He's not just riding his bike now, he's teaching other kids how to fix theirs. Because when someone invests in your potential, you don't just grow. You become someone who invests in others' potential too. The slide changed to show Emma at her science fair, explaining her project on renewable energy to a group of judges who were clearly impressed by her depth of understanding. "This is my daughter Emma, presenting a project she designed herself because she learned that understanding is more valuable than just having the right answers. She's not just getting good grades. She's becoming someone who asks better questions." David paused, letting the images speak for themselves before continuing. "Here's what I want you to understand. You don't need a special title or advanced degrees or corporate resources to change someone's life. You just need to choose to notice when someone is struggling, believe they can learn, and invest a little time in teaching instead of just fixing." He looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting his speech live to thousands more viewers around the world. Maybe you're a manager who could spend 5 extra minutes explaining why a process works instead of just what to do. Maybe you're a parent who could involve your children in solving problems instead of solving them for your children. Maybe you're a coworker who could share knowledge instead of hoarding it, a neighbor who could teach a skill instead of just lending a tool, a friend who could ask questions that help someone think through their challenges instead of just offering advice. David's voice softened as he reached his conclusion. The most powerful technology in the world isn't artificial intelligence or quantum computing or virtual reality. It's human intelligence, the capacity we all have to help each other learn, grow, and discover possibilities we never knew existed. He clicked to his final slide, which showed a simple image of hands helping hands. 1 year ago, I thought I was just helping a frustrated kid fix his bike. I had no idea I was actually fixing my own life, his mother's understanding of what her son needed, and ultimately creating a ripple effect that would touch thousands of people around the world. David stepped away from the podium, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. Your moment is waiting for you. Someone in your life, maybe someone you encounter today, needs exactly what you have to offer. They need someone to notice their struggle, believe in their potential, and invest time in their growth. When you make those 3 simple choices, you won't just change their life. You'll discover who you were meant to become. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, but David barely heard it. He was thinking about all the people watching who might be inspired to notice, believe, and invest in someone else's potential. He was thinking about the countless small acts of teaching and encouragement that would ripple out from this moment, creating transformations that no one could predict or measure. As David left the stage, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Sarah would be so proud of the man you've become and the father you've always been. But the message that made David's eyes fill with tears came from Emma. Daddy, I watched your speech at school during lunch. Mrs. Chen said you reminded everyone why teaching is the most important job in the world. I can't wait to hug you when you get home. Walking toward the airport for his flight back to the city that had become home, David reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. A single choice to help a child had led to discovering his life's purpose. But more importantly, it had taught him that everyone, absolutely everyone, has the power to be a teacher, a mentor, a catalyst for someone else's growth. The world was full of wobbly bike wheels waiting to be fixed, and every one of them was an opportunity to change 2 lives at once, the person being taught and the person choosing to teach. All it took was the courage to kneel down, pay attention, and believe that understanding was always possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.